everybody that when we last updated our terms of reference, we said that every 5 years, everybody on the conference board would need to go through, update their information, submit the questionnaire again. That's coming up in 2026, and we'll send out reminders. But just so it's in the back of your mind somewhere, 2026, before the next meeting, is when you go through and update your questionnaire for being on the conference board. Okay, and then today we're going to be talking about the season opening and closing dates. Before we sort of open the floor to motions on that, I wanted to give Robert a chance to talk about the year-round fishery and Canada's interest in moving to a year-round fishery. So why don't you go ahead, Robert?
Thank you very much. So the reason I brought this proposal forward is it's mostly for the fleet that's fishing out there right now, the sablefish and the rockfish fisheries during the winter, and they're encountering halibut, and they have to let it go. And with our vessel monitoring and 100% accountability for what we catch, there's a mortality associated with halibut, even if they're deemed alive. You still have a 3.36 pound mortality for each halibut, which you have to cover with quota. And most guys that are fishing have to rent the quota, so it's a cost to them. With the quotas looking the way they are and probably going down, it's making more sense for guys to start doing combination trips, and so that they can go out and catch a multiple amount of species and bring it into the like basically have a boatload instead of having a small trip. So I think that there's no biological reason why, and Linda asked Dr. Stewart yesterday if there was a biological reason. There is no biological reason why we have a close date. So with the price of fuel, price of bait, price of grub, price of like everything going up, like your maintenance, our observer costs, like everything's going up, and then you attack on a mortality on this fish, and it also increases your when you're out there fishing sablefish and rockfish, you can't go to all the good areas that you'd like to go to because you're going to encounter some halibut. So you're trying to avoid halibut, which is, I mean, if there's no biological reason and you have quota and you can take it, why are we throwing it back? So I really like to see a year-round fishery. It's not a whole lot of boats that are fishing there. It's not going to be a whole lot of fish that's being brought in the winter because, frankly, it's the winter. The weather's crap, but there is breaks in the weather when guys get out there and they can go and make some money. So I'm just asking you guys to think about looking at the big picture here of supplying the market with fresh fish, because that's what the market wants. They want fresh fish. And so I'll kind of leave it there, but I just don't see the reason why we have a closed period when there's no biological reason. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ken.
I actually fish live rockfish at times, and know quite a bit about the fishery. Right now is Chinese New Year's, which is quillbacks are what they call a delicacy, and it's a huge market at this time of year. This week, right now, if you went down to Chinatown, you would see the amount of people filling the restaurants, those types of things, and having banquets. And there's, maybe last week, probably 10 or 12 boats out to fill that market. There's one fellow who texted me where he was encountering halibut this week. Not a lot, but just as an example, if he had 400 pounds of halibut, which maybe is 25 halibut, he's fishing no deeper than probably 25 fathoms of water. he has an expense of $2,000. If he was allowed to sell that fish, he would have extra revenue of at least $4,000. And it makes a substantial difference into the economics of what he's doing. That quota comes off of our overall TAC. So it will be incorporated into what is reported as Canada's share. It's not something which is just goes flying away someplace and nobody sees it. He is 100% monitoring. And if he doesn't comply, he's subject to additional costs for additional viewing and possibly not getting a number to go back out fishing. It just makes absolutely no sense to be returning those fish to the water and taking a mortality charge. The amount of fish that will be caught is very minimal. On a ZN license, you can land 7,500 pounds of halibut up until 20,000 pounds of rockfish landed. 20,000 pounds of quillbacks is a lot of fish. It actually amounts to somewhere in the neighborhood of, depending on the area you're fishing. But one ZN license has maybe 1,000 pounds of rock cod with it. So that's 20 licenses right there. There's 190 licenses in BC. All the rock cod does not get caught. The quota is never filled. And even if he goes above the 20,000 pounds of rockfish, the next level is 10,000 pounds of halibut total, up to 40,000 pounds of rockfish, which no boat will ever reach in that fishery. So it's just something to help these guys out. Most of them are younger. I certainly have no intention of going out this time of the year. And there's a number of people the same as me that are not rockfish, but some of those people are actually in Hawaii right now. So, and they have no intention of going out at this time of the year. So it's not going to be a big impact. It's not going to be a lot of fish that's landed. We're not asking for somebody with an LTAB, a halibut tab, to be able to do that. Just have the LTAB in that season. The K license, Ben could probably speak more to that, but it's the same story there. It's tied to how much black cod they land.
Thank you. Chris, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, Ken kind of touched on it. I just want to make it clear that so everyone understands in the system we have, if you're halibut boat, you fish for halibut, you're capped at the other non-halibut species, how much rockfish you can land, how much sablefish you can land. And like a rockfish boat, for example, they have 0 halibut to start if they want. And so they're as Ken said, their vessel caps, they've got caps in place as to how much they can land. There's also fleet caps in place. Okay, so if you want to target on halibut, you need a halibut license, you need to be a halibut boat. What it is about addressing incidental catches that we occur, like same thing, we don't have any sablefish, guys go catch sablefish, got to talk to the sablefish boat, get some quota off that. We've got caps on us on sablefish and on rockfish, and we've got fleet-wide caps. So just so you understand, that's how the system works. There are caps in place. It's not about somebody can't go out as a rockfish boat and catch a whole bunch of halibut. As Ken was saying, they're limited in what they can take. It's about making sure you can cover the incidental catch mortalities. Thanks.
Okay, I just want to respond to one thing. So I did ask the question of Dr. Stewart, is there an impact, a negative? And what I heard was there isn't a documented biological impact, but I can't tell you it doesn't disturb spawning. that there also isn't information to say there isn't. And we can bring them back here if we need to clarify, but that's what I heard. And I just wanted to restate that. Okay, go ahead.
I had to step out of the room, so I apologize if this already got brought up. But where would that quota? Let's say it's January 10th, and you're getting some incidental halibut. Is that coming off? For instance, right now it's 2025. Is that coming off 2024, or is that because the quotas aren't out yet? It's just. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, it's going off last year's quota. So in other words, our landed reported catch is going to go up slightly because these guys are taking mortality. So it says we've caught 94% of our fish, well, it will go up slightly. That's where some of it comes from. And as far as I know anyways, halibut are spawning in deeper waters. And rock cod, those fish do not live that deep. You rarely fish rock cod over 50 fathoms. That's and hardly at all at 50 fathoms. So, I mean, it's not an issue, I don't believe, for that particular fishery.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Yeah, I mean, I don't anticipate myself. I mean, I'm a halibut fisherman, purely directed, and I don't do any of these combo trips or anything. But combo trips are becoming a much bigger part of our industry as a result. As far as, let's say, black cod, which is still open for us right now, there's only been 15 reported hail outs for targeted black cod alone trips this year. Most of our black cod fleet is allowed to freeze at sea, which just makes it far more economical for us. So almost all of them do. As you guys know, the frozen or halibut market has not been as strong as the fresh market. So these guys also aren't targeting halibut. So for those 15 directed sablefish hail outs, their average halibut bycatch has been 1,408 pounds per trip. So clearly no one's out there trying to do some kind of winter halibut fishing. I mean, this was during the summer, you know, so there's, again, like I said, because it's weird, I'm not going to get into the Canadian politics of combination trips and things, but basically if you only have a sablefish license and you're hailing out for sablefish, you can't combine sablefish with rockfish either. So it'd just be sablefish halibut trips that you'd be targeting. So these 15 sablefish trips are likely, like I said, these are just my most recent numbers on how many hailed out sablefish trips there have been this year, are most likely only because halibut's been closed. So of those 15, they have to report their weight landed, which would be the mortality, which is only, like I said, 1,400 pounds a trip. But we're paying that quota lease anyway. And it'd be nice if it could be a positive instead of a negative when they're looking at their paycheck for the trip.
Yeah, go ahead, Buck.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Buck Lakaitis, on its merits, I support this. I mean, I would advocate for the same thing for some of our winter fisheries, you know, at times. Clearly, you guys have better monitoring than the U.S. I don't see a huge risk. I think probably the impact to the stock in the wintertime, I want people to be clear that I am mostly concerned here about spawning biomass, impacts to spawning, preserving the stock. But I think, you know, this kind of proposal is would have minor impacts compared to some of the impacts that we have in year-round fisheries in the Bering Sea. Having said that, I guess I have a process question about when we'd vote on this, because I could see supporting it, but I'm also thinking about the negotiation, because I'd like to get you guys back on your stock distribution. And you know, that's where we are, guys. I think you guys should be able to do this in your own country. I mean, it makes sense. You have all the tools in place, and you should have economics and and do that. But we have this big problem about your stock distribution and taking an allocation versus looking at where all these fish are. And that comes out of our economics. So I don't know when we vote on this, on the merits, I like it, but then I have the whole other problem. And that's the elephant in the room today.
So just in terms of process, we were going to have a discussion about this. I think we're wrapping that up. We're going to go to motions on the season start and end date. This year-round fishery was submitted as a regulatory proposal, so it'll come up later in the meeting. I had understood we weren't considering this year-round fishery for this year. It was an opportunity to comment, hear about it, think about it, and then it's coming up as a regulatory proposal. So if we're ready to wrap up the conversation around that, okay, we'll take two more, but then we'll go to motions on season start or end dates. People can take them together or separate, whichever you want. But okay, Robert, why don't we let you close it out?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask when we maybe get to the regulatory proposal or whenever we have a chance to get Dr. Stewart back in here just to clarify the risks or the of having a year-round fishery. Thank you.
Okay, we ready to go to season dates? And Mark, were you wanting to talk before that or?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Just a quick question. I was curious, is there a way to accomplish your goal without opening the season for the directed fleet? So is there a way that you could change the regulations so the small boat mixed species fleet can keep their halibut bycatch, but the larger directed boats are not going out there and fishing?
Go ahead, Chris.
That's a good question, I think, and Robert, correct me if I'm wrong. Just want to remind everybody, I think the intent of this is to go to a year-round fishery in the long term for the directed halibut fleet as well. We'd like to do that. But with respect to your question about could somehow the regulations, the conditions be changed to allow retention in the sort of the non-directed fishery, I don't know. I'll give you an example. Like for instance, lingcod. Lingcod has a closure that's slightly different than halibut, and we have to release the lingcod. So I'm leaning towards the no, but that's something we'd have to check with our fisheries managers.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I think this would be a lot easier to support if there was some kind of stipulation in there like that. So maybe if you guys could do some research and see, because I think for a lot of us, the concern is disturbing the spawning population in the middle of winter, and I'm not worried about a small boat mixed fishing causing that much of an uproar in the spawning fish, but I am worried about larger boats that are fishing harder. So thank you.
Okay, to be continued when we get to regulatory proposal, and we'll ask Dr. Stewart to be here.
Can offer similar.
Okay, all right, well, we'll get one of them here. Okay, so I think we're ready, but we're going to go into season start dates now. So we are ready for a motion. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I'd like to make the motion that we're just talking opening dates, or season dates.
I had a request from the US side to take them separately, the start and end date. So if you don't mind doing that.
We'll do that. I'd like to make the motion that the 2025 commercial halibut season open on March 7th, 2025 at 0600 hours. And if there's a seconder, I'll speak to the motion. We're good? Okay.
And the second, say their name or their group, so we get it for the minutes.
Russell, UFAWU.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so March 7th, we've opened in those dates in the past, and last year we tried opening early at the 0600 hours. Opening on that date will allow fish to be landed. They'll come in early, mid of the following week, so product will be available for the weekend. In Canada, there are some important halibut areas where favorable tides are necessary, and that March 7th date provides those favorable tides needed that boats can operate in those areas. And it's also going to help us increase compared to last year, depending on the closing date, the amount of time commercial vessels have to harvest the allowable catch, and we'll be able to keep fresh fish on the market longer and spread the fishing out. Thank you.
Okay, I want to make one clarification. We're going to say that 6 o'clock Canada time. So we have both countries opening at the same time, but Alaska opens at 5. Because that
that's what we
was
did
not
last year, right?
clear this
That's what we
year.
did last year.
That's not what we did last year. Canada opened an hour ahead. So let's be clear about what time zone
Well, I think
is in the motion.
we never discussed that, but I think we'd want to everybody open at the same time.
Okay. Well, we're going to say 6 a.m. Canada time. Okay, any discussion? Sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, Brian Dafford, FVOA. I can't see our commissioners supporting that. We're getting the same sort of feedback about being able to print permits, but more so this year, we got a change in leadership, and there's secretaries that need to sign off on stuff, and I don't think that would be able to happen in time. So I would be more supportive of something in the neighborhood of March 15th, which is what we did last year.
Robert?
Yeah, March 15th is the tides are just not good for where the bulk of the fleet starts on opening day. Like March 12th is the very last day that those guys could fish. And then the next set of tides would be March 18th, which is pretty late to start the season. I mean, I still think we've opened early in the past, and I understand that you guys have a new government and stuff, but the government works for you guys, so you should be lobbying for the government to do this job. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful or anything like that. I totally not trying to stir the pot or anything like that, but we have opened earlier.
Just a point of clarification, the opposition is an administrative issue. It's not you're opposed to opening earlier.
No, personally, I'm not really opposed to opening earlier.
You just see an administrative problem.
I won't be going that early. I would rather, like, if I was just talking about personal reasons, I like starting later, but people want to get going. If they want to go out there when I have no problem with other people doing that.
But go ahead, Phil.
I don't have any preference yet. I'm still waiting for the dates are, dependent on tides, but the processors, I think, came in with March 10th. And so this is just informative. And I think that the Boston Seafood Show, which they regulate, is the 16th to the 18th this year, which is later. So I don't know the rationale, but I know the other two big players for us to deal with are the processors when they want to open, because of the lack of the amount of processing capacity we've lost. And the way they hire now is with bringing in crews and mobilizing crew is really more expensive. So they're watching their costs. So I think they were probably talking about, wait until the 15th, but the few processors that are here should be heard from. And also NIMS in Juneau now has been really struggling here with a new program or fixing their program. So they really haven't even allowed any IFQ transfers for the first 2 months of the year. And I would doubt that they could probably, like last year, get the stuff ready by the middle of the month. So those are considerations that we haven't really finalized yet. So until we hear what the processors really want and really what the people in general can do, it's really hard to make a decision for me and my group. So thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just kind of more of a question of your administrative stance. Is it that NIMS can't issue licenses fast enough between this meeting and the opening dates we're suggesting? And would a potential solution to that be moving the IPHC meetings back a couple weeks? Just because it doesn't sound like the government can issue the licenses fast enough. And I fully understand that. And I understand why you guys would like to see a later date as a result. You know, I want everyone to have the same access to the markets at the same time. I get it. But, you know, almost all of the BC halibut is is a fresh market. And you can flood that market very quickly. So I like giving people as much opportunity as possible so that we don't see any big spikes and crashes in the market as a result of a smaller season. You know, we have other fisheries that are going on and stuff, and a lot of guys like to go get their halibut out of the water early. But I don't know what you guys saw at the beginning of the year, but for us, the price and after the opening was just terrible because everyone had other stuff to do. And, you know, even that 1 week change really changes our market because we have a lot of herring openings around the same time. And some guys have to choose between herring and halibut. And the later openings allow people to go herring fishing, take all the gear off, put all the halibut gear on, and then go crash the market on the opening for us.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor right now for March 7th. We can vote on that. If it doesn't pass on the US side, someone else can put a different motion on the floor for an opening date. But right now, that's our opening date motion on the floor. And I mean, just to respond to comments, I think we had pretty clear indication from the governing agency that they think it's very unlikely they would have regulations in place or quota permits out before the 15th. We can push them, but that's what they told us. And I think we heard that the processors supported the 10th. So we have that information for people to factor in. Okay, any other comments on the motion? All right, so we're gonna try out the clickers. Here we go. We didn't even do a practice,
Well,
but you guys
actually,
have this.
We're gonna give a quick presentation and we're gonna just go straight to the video.
You want to do a presentation?
Yeah, just quick.
Okay, there's gonna be quick instructions here before we vote. So I'll turn it over to Monica. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'll try to make this as quick as possible. I got a lot of buttons to click here, so just give me a second. Okay. It's pretty easy. You've got 3 buttons that actually work on your clickers for those in person. When the vote is open, click yes, no, or abstain, and your name should appear. It should change from gray to blue on the screen in front of you in the Adobe Connect room. And also on your little clicker, it should appear with a number associated with your intended vote. You can change your vote as many times as you want while the vote's open. But before we close the vote, make sure that number on your clicker screen is the vote that you want. Any questions? Okay.
That clear to everybody? Everybody got that? Okay.
So
And for the online folks,
there's no off switch. It should just turn back on if you push a button. And you don't need to push the send button. That's really common for those in person. There's a little mail-y looking thing. You don't need to push that.
don't push the send button. People got that?
Can. You don't have to. You can. Okay.
You give a button, we're gonna push it.
Yeah, exactly.
It won't break it.
We're good at that. Pushing buttons.
So for those online, I think I've seen most of you or all of you sign in successfully at least once. I think right now I have 8 out of 10. So if you're not signed in right now, I would please sign in before we do this first vote. So within a minute, hopefully, and just place any issues you're having in the chat and we'll help you. You can also email, but the chat in the Adobe room might be quicker. The only common errors is either putting or not putting a space in your name. So the first name says your country affiliation, a space, and then your acronym, and your unique ID says IPHC, no space, and then some numbers. And for the online voters, when you are signed in successfully, it just says town vote somewhere on your screen. And when you are online and a vote is open, you can see your acronym will have a dark blue left on the left, the little vertical bar. That means you're online and ready to vote. Once you vote, again, your whole bar is going to turn from gray to blue, just like those people in person. And this is just kind of a picture of what your screen might look like. And again, you can change your vote as many times as you want, and your vote should appear on your screen, the one before we close it. So just make sure that you have the right one before we close the vote. Once the vote is closed, your individual voting results will be shown, and that's for everybody in the room and online, and it'll look something like the top picture there on the right. After the vote closes, please give me about 60 seconds or less, my record's 35 so far, to come up with the by country display you see there on the bottom. If we don't need to have that, I'll let the chairs decide whether or not we want to display it. So we don't have to, but it takes about 60 seconds after that top screen disappears for me to make the second one appear. Right. Okay, let's display it.
Okay. Everybody got that? Any questions?
No.
Okay, so we're voting on March 7th, 6 a.m. local time. So 6 a.m. Canada, that would be 5 a.m. in Alaska. Opening time for the halibut season. Oh, we have a question.
I just got one question about, if we pass this, would there be a chance to have a comment for the commissioners afterwards?
Yeah,
Alongside it?
I mean, it is better to say what you're going to say. I don't want people to give us a bunch of comments that they didn't say in front of everybody.
Okay.
So if I've heard comments that there's concern about the US government getting these out in time, about processors being open. We've captured that so far.
Okay, I have one more comment I could make then.
Okay.
I'm definitely sensitive to you guys wanting to start early. And I think I'd like to try to be optimistic and see what they can do. I'm definitely opposed to you guys starting before us and us not being able to get it done. So eventually I'm going to lean on our commissioners to get together and find the middle ground that we can all agree on. But I see no harm in supporting it in the room today.
Thanks, Brian. All right. Now are we ready? Voting on the March 7th opening date. Okay. Click away.
Linda or Jim or Secretariat, what are those blue? Like there's beside names, there's like gray and then there's a dark blue. Is that what's?
I think he's asking about the dark blue.
Yeah, there's a tab.
Oh, the
that's
dark blue bars on the left-hand side, those are the 10 online voters. And
Oh,
that-
okay,
That
thank
just
you.
means they're online and they're capable of voting.
Roger that.
Mhm.
Is-
Yes.
Yeah, I'm online, but I'm not seeming to be able to click.
Is she refresh the browser?
So try refreshing your browser, Kathy, and then try again to click. And if that doesn't work, just tell us your vote.
Well, I'll start with saying my vote's going to be no, and kind of hard to refresh the browser when I'd have to actually have to sign out.
21st. So, so I'm Chris McDowell.
We can add her in manually.
Okay.
I'm speaking to-
If she wants to say her vote or.
She did. She said no. Yeah. Okay, we got your vote, Kathy, and maybe you can work with Monica to get your online voting working for the next vote. Okay, everybody finished? I think we can see all of them, right? Or we have one person missing? Oh, applicant fisheries.
We'll have to wait for Jim on that.
Yeah, sorry, because the rules of procedure state that this is-
You got it?
Did you get applicant that he wants to vote, but he's. Okay, we're gonna close the vote. Closing the vote. All right. So now, did it pass on the US side?
You need to vote first, and then we'll be.
Okay, so once you have totaled the US side.
I'll display it. Yeah. Are you ready to this?
Okay, so the tally is here. We have it, that opening date passed on for Canada, but did not pass for the US. So if someone on the US side wants to suggest a different opening date, we can see if there's enough votes to pass it. We'll take one more shot at that. Anybody have a motion for a different opening date? Go ahead, Brian.
All right, FEOA makes a motion for March 10th then.
Is there a second for that?
Second,
Can you state your name, organization?
Elwood, NGFA.
Thank you. Okay, Brian, you want to speak to your motion? Why the 10th instead of the 7th?
I'm just trying to find as much agreement as possible, and I've heard that the processors are pushing that date, so it's not March 15th, which I initially proposed, but it's closer to what you guys are after, so I'm just trying to find some middle ground.
Okay, any other comments? Go ahead.
I wasn't ready to comment, but I'll comment anyways. I'm just looking at the tides here. it only really gives us, that day to fish, like the 10th. And then it's unfishable. Yeah, you're looking at, what is it? An 18-foot tide or 18-foot spread. It's too much tide. So that like the 10th is pretty much the last day that you can really effectively fish. That being said, I mean, there's not much difference between the 10th and the 7th. So, I mean, I would hope that, yeah, the tides I just can't make a trip on one day. I'd be voting against this.
Okay, anybody else? Go ahead.
Yeah, Angus Grout, the Stevenson Halibut Association. And I won't be supporting this. I do appreciate the, working for a compromise, but I don't know if your federal government's anything like ours and getting stuff done, after the 7th, the next 2 days are a weekend. And whether your government be working through those and getting any closer to issuing licenses, that sort of thing, I don't know. That was just my comment. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the motion there, Brian. Yeah, I'm kind of on board with these guys. I know your guys' processors were very happy with the 10th, but it kind of brings the fish to market at a kind of an awkward time for Canada, which would not be the reason for my objection. But I'm with these guys. A lot of that really productive ground getting closed forces us all into the other areas, and I don't like playing bumper boats out there. I'm not an Alaskan gill netter. I'm not used to that. But I really appreciate you trying to find a compromise. My other comment is there some sort of NIMS representative we can get here to question about what we as a commission could possibly do to get rid of this kind of administrative barrier? Like I mentioned earlier, do we need to have these meetings a week or two earlier, just so we don't run into this kind of gridlock that we seem to run into every year? Because I feel like as a conference board, we could quite easily find a date that everyone's happy with if we didn't have that kind of constraint. Because I'm fully on board with you. It would be completely unfair for us to be able to fish, and because of administrative reasons, you guys can't access that same opening day market. So I would be opposed to any opening date that wouldn't allow you guys to start on the same date as us as well. I just want to make sure that you guys always will be able to, no matter what date we pick.
I think that's a fair question, and we'll get Kurt in here after this vote to see if there's, just to see if there's a solution for future years. Okay, so motion on the floor. Oh, okay, sorry. Go ahead, Kathy.
I have a question for the Canadians, or I confirm. I believe I heard you say that if you couldn't do the 7th, the next best date was the 18th for you. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the next set of tides.
So I'm wondering if that isn't our compromise, in that starting on the 18th, you have the tides right for the Canadians and you have the time that we need on the US side. So I'll be voting no on the 10th. That's still, from everything I've gotten from our government, too early. And hope we come up with another date that works. Thank you.
Somebody want to speak to that? Why don't you go ahead? You had your hand up first. Yeah.
Again, like the 18th is late. We encounter again with our bycatch issues, so it's whenever everything opens, you don't have to pay for that bycatch mortality. Again, there's fleet still fishing. The shorter season, again, it makes it just harder to get fish out of the water. And like Ben was saying, like we sell a lot of fresh fish here in Vancouver and Victoria, and those markets can get flooded fairly quickly if a bunch of fish is coming and hitting the docks. So we'd like to see as long a season as possible. And so even if that is the compromise, I mean, that's the compromise, but I wouldn't be really voting for the 18th either.
Go ahead, man.
Yeah, thanks. again, yeah, my kind of selfish reasons, but it kind of benefits us all for pushing for an earlier season. It's like I said, we have one herring fishery in Canada a year, and it's always around the first week of March. And I don't like to see this price tank because all of a sudden everyone can go herring fishing and do the halibut opening at once. You know, I find that the price of halibut is slow up, fast down, and it took us a long time to climb out of that hole into April and stuff, where the price of halibut was just garbage. And a lot of that was because of how many of us went out on the opening as a result of that later opening we had on the 15th and a kind of an earlier herring year, as well as some decrease in our herring quotas. So that's kind of my personal reason, but I think it will affect all of us. If more Canadians can access that fresh market, it will push the opening day price down with a later start date.
Okay, so I think, Kathy, the answer to the question was no. There isn't support from Canada. They've passed their date at March 7th. I don't see a lot of interest in moving to a later date. Go ahead, maybe I'm wrong.
No, it wasn't really so much about that. It was just to add one more little piece of context why we're always pushing for opening at like the bottom of a set of tides, is because with our accountable practices, with our camera systems and our reduced certain choke species like yellow eye rockfish, in that time of year we really are forced to like just a handful of spots. There's about 3 spots on the whole 2B like BC coast that everyone fishes at on that opening week or 2 of the season. So and those spots are high tidal spots, and we just can't fish them anywhere near. And it just and you know, guys do, as we all know, fishing and limit opportunities, and we just push it anyways, and we end up just leaving a bunch of gear in the bottom, which none of us want either, because it's a bunch of wasted fish. And as we all see less and less fish, we don't want to waste a single fish. They're all important to all of us, both sides. So I just wanted to add the fact that that's why BC or Canada is always pushing for opening. Obviously we want an earlier opening for market conditions, but also to have it aligned with a small set of tides, because where we have to fish, there's really only a handful of spots, and they're very tide sensitive. So just wanted to add that. So
Okay, appreciate that context. Brian.
I just wanted to know if any of the Canadians' comments have swayed any of the US conference board, that they would, you know, consider changing their opinion on their first vote.
Can I speak to that? I mean, I voted for this. I'm in the camp of, I completely support Canada on this opening date, and it's our government's responsibility to, you know, it's the tail wagging the dog, as it often is. And we make a recommendation to the commissioners, and they're going to decide if it's reasonable or not. And I'm fine. I don't know if that sways anybody else on our side. I was kind of surprised by the vote myself, but yeah, you shouldn't be held up by our government's problems. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, just, I don't know, it seems like we're tilting at windmills over this issue, and I can't help but wonder if we can get compromise on the back end of the season and you know, look at it from that. We've sort of tackled opening and closing as 2 separate issues, and I think the Canadian side just wants a longer season. So, you know, if we can compromise there, maybe that's the solution. I don't personally have an issue with the 18th of March, but you know, I think the question is, how late into the fall can we go?
Okay, appreciate that. All right, but we have a motion on the floor right now for March 10th. Let's take a vote on that and see if how that fares. So I would think Canada's already voted. You guys already have a vote, but I'll let you decide if you want to vote on this or not. But we want US people to vote on March 10th as an opening date. Yeah, they can vote. I mean, you've already passed the date, so. So Canada, we'll have everybody vote. We're voting on the March 10th opening date.
Kathy, are you still having trouble voting? Just want to make sure you get counted if you did want to be.
Kathy, if you're not able to vote, then just let us know your vote.
No. And yes, I'm still having trouble.
Kathy, can you please let us know, can you see actually the voting screen, or it's just the town vote, or the page is not connecting at all?
I can see the screen. It just doesn't let me click anything. There was a tip that came up that said to hit enter. I tried that and it didn't
And
work.
there's like a voting buttons on the very bottom. Did you try these?
For me, they're over on the side, not the bottom.
Okay. Well, please put like raise your thumbs up or thumbs down or abstain the head in the chat, and we'll count your votes separately.
Okay, I like that.
Okay, and we're missing
They're not online anymore.
Puget Sound Anglers dropped off.
But Adobe Connect and
Okay, I think we're ready to close the vote. Vote's closing. Yeah. Yeah, let's get this. Okay, so it looks like that passed on the US side. So we have failed with Canada. So Canada is supporting March 7th, US is supporting March 10th. I don't know if what Kurt is in the room to answer the question about is there a solution to our government not being able to push these things out earlier. Do we want to take that right now while he's here? Okay. Kurt. Maybe you can, yeah, if there's a mic down there. So that we've been talking about opening dates, and we've shared that the US government has struggled to get regs in place and permits out before the 15th, that we anticipate this year being particularly bad with the change of administration and some of the shenanigans going on. And so there was a question about whether if we move the IPHC meeting up a few weeks, so you had a few more weeks before when this meeting happened and the dates were set and when the season opened in, early-ish in March, whether that would help you at all, or if there's any other steps that can be taken to facilitate the US getting regulations in place for earlier season.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. Madam Chair, I'm sorry. Just for the record, I'm Kurt Iverson. I work with NOAA Fisheries in Juneau, in the Alaska region. It's a good but complicated question. Maybe it would help if I just went through the process before I get to the question. We end the meeting here with a regulatory proposal for season openings and season closings. The IPHC then codifies those regulations, and there's a specific process for NOAA fisheries beginning in the Alaska region to send a regulatory notice to NIMS headquarters where those regulations, the IPHC regulations, are going to be reviewed. Based upon their review of the regulations, they would either recommend to the Secretary of Commerce and the Secretary of State to either approve those regulations or disapprove them. Invariably, that recommendation has been to approve the regs. So it is forwarded to the respective departments of Commerce and State. Now, the crucial approval, the next stage of approval, is at the Department of State. That the Secretary has to review those, and it's reviewed very carefully at that level. And once that review, based upon the recommendation coming from NOAA Fisheries, once that review occurs and the regs are accepted, then that effectively ends, that is the approval process. Then we can open the fishery. What we see in the Federal Register is effectively noticing that approval. That notice provides effective notice of all of the regulations that were passed. But the key element there is that handshake with the Department of State. That's what allows the fishery to effectively open. To comply with the Administrative Procedures Act and notice the public, we follow through with the federal notice. So it is important to publish that before the fishery opens as well, but it is not as crucial as the approval by the Department of State. And that has been part of the hang-up in the past, is those necessary steps. They begin, and it's really quite prompt, coming out of the IPHC. The IPHC is very good at moving those regs ahead to NOAA Fisheries. NOAA Fisheries, in turn, is well aware of the importance of these regs moving ahead, so that turnaround tends to be quite quick. But at the Department of State, things are different. The considerations are broader. In this year in particular, same as other years where there's a change of administration, that process at the Department of State could be slowed down. These are new people in new jobs. And like you see everywhere, when that occurs, their first reaction is go slow. We want to go slow. And in some cases, the people who are going to be making these approvals they haven't even been appointed yet. So this year in particular, like other years where we have a new administration, we could see trouble at that level. Okay. Last year, you're correct, we had trouble. It's not clear to me why it took longer, but it did at the Department of State. And we're all aware in the United States of that backlog that occurred, especially with the transfers of permits, things like that. I hope that gets at the meat of the issue, but I'm happy to take questions too.
So I guess the last part of the question was, what can we do to facilitate? So if a decision was made 2 weeks earlier, I don't know how realistic it is to think that the IPHC meeting could be moved, but if it could be moved up 2 weeks, would that facilitate an earlier opening date?
Oh, thanks for reminding me. Yes. Yes, it would help. It would give us 2 more weeks. 2 more weeks if the fishery, assuming the fishery opening stayed the same, say you're targeting March 10th or whatever, and the meeting ended 2 weeks earlier than it did this year, it would buy us more time for that process to occur. There may be other considerations, but limiting it only to that consideration, yes, it would help.
Great. Okay. Thanks for that. I think that's what we're looking for. It looks like we have a couple questions, Robert, and then Maddie.
So when the government is reviewing the regs that are passed at IPHC, is it looking at the whole suite, or can they like cherry pick like the opening date? And then I'll have a follow up once you answer that.
Yeah, good question, and thanks for the question. My understanding it is the whole suite of regs. It is all or nothing.
Okay, so, and then this is kind of directed towards both the NOAA and the Secretariat. Would it be possible to, like at the interim meeting, because we have an interim meeting every year, would it be possible to just decide on an opening date at the interim meeting, and we can have a discussion here, like the tides are the tides. I mean, it's math. So if you had basically in November, you knew what the opening date is, and it was just passed for that opening date regulation, would that help? And then you just deal with all the other regulations after the EGM.
Thanks for that question too. Again, I'm not sure the answer to that, but you would effectively be passing regulations at two stages. Is that what you're suggesting? We would pass one body of regulations in November and another body of regulations in
Yeah,
February.
that's kind of what I was the only regulation that you would be potentially passing would be the opening date and nothing other than the opening date, just to give you like 3 months or 2 months to pass it through your regulatory bodies.
Thanks. Procedurally, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for that question.
But I think, Kurt, you can't really open the season without people knowing what their quotas are. So even if you pass the opening date sooner, you can't let people fish until you've issued IFQs.
That is correct.
Yeah. Okay. Maddie is next, and then Chris.
Kurt, I always thought that, again, yes, that the divisor needs to be published in the Federal Register and that the TAC needs to be published in the Federal Register before we can go fishing. And not just that, but before RAM can issue permits, which also necessarily requires them to figure out over and under carryover from the previous year, which I've always understood was a large part of the delay, is figuring out what the overage and underage is. And is there, could you speak to, is there a better way to do that? Or like would funding for better technology or something? It seems like it takes a very long time to calculate overage and underage.
Right. Thanks, Mandy. That is true. It's a complicated calculation, but more than anything, RAM does not want to do any of those calculations, waste all that time doing that if they don't know if there's going to be a change to the regulations. We're sitting here today talking about TCEYs and resulting catch limits. And ultimately, those catch limits are approved by the Secretary of State. So RAM Division is not going to be calculating overages and underages and issuing permits, calculating IFQs and issuing permits until they know for sure what the catch limits are going to be. So in other words, they wait as well. They wait until we have that final approval. And the moment I get it, the moment I hear about it, the first people I call are up in RAM. You're good to go. Go ahead. And of course, leading up to that, they do a lot of testing. They've done their dry runs. And then they can crank it out. At that point, they can crank it out actually quite quickly. The overages and underages and calculations of IFQ go pretty quickly at that point because they've done the dry runs. But they're not going to do anything until they get that approval.
Okay, thanks, Kurt. I think we're going to want to wrap this up, move along pretty soon, but one last.
Yeah, I was just curious, is there a way to, open the season without doing all the calculations on a short-term basis, like releasing 20% of the quota and then doing the calculations and then deciding what the rest of it is? I mean, I think that's done in some other fisheries. Is that a possibility?
No, I don't think procedurally and administratively it'd be possible.
All right. Thanks for that Kurt, maybe something we can keep thinking about. You have a comment? Okay, go ahead.
So, I don't know, you have to ask the commission about the logistics of pushing the meeting up 2 weeks. Then you're conflicting with the PSE meetings, which there's people on both sides that attend those. You may want to look at, and this has always gone over like a lead balloon, is just having fixed starting dates. So it's the same every year. That may be one way out of this, but that's never been very well supported from year to year anyways, but I don't see how you can, I don't know if that would help with if they know it's the same day every year, but.
Okay, Rebecca, is it on this? You have
It's on probably the next action and maybe other actions. I was going to ask if for the next action and if we could do the motion and then a substitute motion so that people understand what the two choices are. So we can because this one, I was actually surprised at the outcome of the vote. My sense is if people had known what the choices were, maybe we could have come to a more of a room-wide consensus agreement. So that's just my request, is that people think about procedurally doing it that way instead of having one motion with one vote and then a whole separate motion with another vote. Thank you.
Yeah, we follow Robert's rules, except for trying to accommodate having two parties with different numbers of delegates. And substitute motions are allowed. So if you want to follow that process, that's open to you. I think where we get into real challenges is with amendments sometimes. So substitute motions are probably a cleaner way to go. Or in conversation, trying to flush out where people are and if there's a middle ground. Okay, so I think we're ready now for a motion on the closing date. If anybody is ready to offer one. Yeah, we're just going to keep it open. Okay, go ahead.
December 7th.
Okay, is there a second for December 7th?
Yeah, second.
Okay. Brian from FBOA on the second. Rob Warren from Kodiak. Okay, you want to speak to that, Rob?
No, I think it's actually the same rationale as always, keeping it as open as long as, into the fall as we can. And it's really for us on a personal level, it's more driven by sablefish than anything. I think most of the halibut's done by them, but some are still using, the tail end of their halibut as bycatch to their sablefish, and they're trying to clean up their sablefish. So, there'll be processors that are closed. But there are independents and processors, I know for sure in Kodiak, that bought right up until the end of the season this year. So it worked out well.
Okay, we've been asked for a break for a caucus. So we have that motion on the floor, December 7th for a closing date. We're going to take a little stand down, see if people can come to agreement, both sides, and then come back. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Okay, I'm going to go to Chris for a comment on the motion for a December 7th closing date.
Canada will support the motion. We do, as you guys know, we're interested in a longer season. We were going to propose December 14th, but we'll support the December 7th closing, but we didn't get a time.
Yeah, and we need to.
We would like that 11:59, 23:59 like we had last year. Is that a friendly amendment or is a?
Okay, so that you guys know the way the regs are written, could we have a little less noise at the end of the room so people can hear? Somebody elbow those guys. The way the regs are written, it says local time. So if we say 11:59 local time, it actually closes an hour later in one country than the other. If everybody's fine with that, we can do that. Or you can say it's going to close at the same time, both places, 11:59 Canada, but then it's an hour earlier, 10:59 in the US. So I just want whoever is making the motion to be clear about what they want. And I don't think the closing time is as big a deal as the opening time. So maybe we just stick with local time.
That's what I was gonna say. Like, I'm not scared of an hour here or there on the closure date, you know?
Okay, so on the closing date, it's local time, 11:59, and it's December 7th. 23:59, right. Good
Yeah, we'll
point.
support
Okay.
that motion.
All right, so everybody ready to vote? I feel like we got enough comments in. Okay, so vote is open. Oh, you got another comment?
Yeah, I just had a comment. So you guys had said you were willing to go as far as the 14th or 15th. And I was wondering if Rob would be willing to have a supplemental to that, or if, in favor or not, shifting his 7th to the 14th to vote on. You want to do that now or wait?
I think we have heard in the past that creates some problems for wrapping up the stock assessment from the IPHC, and I can give Ian or Monica a chance to speak to that.
I can start while he gets, essentially, no, but I'll let Ian answer that, I think.
Yeah, so I won't have complete information regardless of when the season ends. There'll always be some logs outstanding. The closer the assessment closing date is to the end of the season, the more complete the data will be. We definitely noticed that there's more outstanding information in the last few years with the season extending into December than it was historically closing in on the 7th or 15th of November. But to be clear, I won't have a complete data set until the following year regardless. I think there is some implication for the costs associated with our port sampling program, though. And I don't know if, Monica, you want to talk about that, but that's the costs of that program have definitely gone up with the longer seasons.
Yes, that's accurate. It's gone up so much that we are very likely not able to sample that far into December or even until December, for the most part. So it does affect us in that we likely won't be able to sample in December. So the longer you extend it, that's the less catch we have access to sample. And for anything not processed by October 30th is actually not included in that year's stock assessment. It's included the next year. So logistically, the stock assessment will occur. It's just like you said, that the data collected after that doesn't get included that year.
Okay, so the motion we have is December 7th. I guess I'm going to stick with that unless there is a, move to amend or offer a different date. Okay, we ready to vote? It looks like some people have started voting. So let's vote on the December 7th local time 23:59 closing date. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure Puget Sound anglers, Dave Johnson, you're showing up as not voting. That's fine if you don't want to vote. We just want to make sure that it's not because you can't vote. So if you're having trouble voting, put something in the chat, let us know, or speak up. Okay, let's close the vote. Okay, great. So we have a motion that passed both sides on closing dates. Awesome. Way to go, Rob. Okay, so I think what we're gonna do, we're gonna go into the mortality limits, but we'll take a 15-minute break first and be back here. Well, should we say, yeah, 10:45, we'll be back here. Okay, I think we're ready for a motion on catch limits.
So let's set the.
I got Brian on a motion, but okay.
Let's put some let's give me. So a reminder that what we've done in the past is you present motions for your own areas. If we promote motions for other areas, we just end up arguing for the day. So I'm suggesting that's what we do. If US wants to put one motion for all areas, that's fine. But if we start pushing between contracting parties, it just breaks down. So I'm just reminding people of that.
Okay, but I think last year I'm going to defer to what the CB wants to run through here. So, okay, Brian, go ahead.
Thank you. I'll just note that my motion does include an allocation for 2B. I'm just going to go east to west, starting with 2A and then finishing with the total coast-wide. I can wait until it gets on screen. Okay.
Oh, hang on a second. No, go ahead.
Going east to west. For 2A, an allocation of 1.62 million pounds, which is a 2% reduction. For 2B, 5.37, which is a 17% reduction. For 2C, 5.3, which is an 8.5% reduction. In 3A, 9.09, which is a 20% reduction. In 3B, a 2.93, which is a 15% reduction. 4A, 1.35, which is a 16% reduction. 4B, 1.06, which is a 15% reduction. 4 CDE, 3.15, which is a 15% reduction. And that's a total of 29.87 million pounds, which is a total coast-wide reduction of 15.3%. With a second, I can speak to it.
Second from Tom Gemmell, Halibut Coalition.
Thank you. I'll be brief here because I anticipate quite a bit of discussion. Currently, we're in a period of low productivity and low level of spawning biomass. I share the concerns that I've heard around this table. I share a lot of them. Noting that the 2016 year class is prominent in both the FIS and in the directed fisheries data. Right now, those fish are only 8 years old, and they're not yet making significant contributions to the spawning biomass. I believe that it is in our best interest as stakeholders and as stewards of the resource to protect these fish and younger year classes, especially given uncertainty in future recruitments. So far as the distributions in the motion, these numbers are a concerted effort to balance FIS data based on a 3-year average and the socioeconomic concerns unique to each area and the treaty rights unique to each area. Again, I believe that now is really an important time for us to be precautionary in setting catch limits. And with that, I'd take any questions.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Any questions? Open it up first to questions on the motion. Go ahead, Doug.
If I've done my math correctly, it looks like the US will be taking a 13% trim. And I'm wondering how that results in a meaningful reduction when the catch came in at 78% this year.
I think that your math is wrong, for starters.
So then help me with the math.
Well, we have a 2% reduction in 2A, which is I think 0.03, and then the next smallest reduction is 8.5% in 2C.
Yeah.
And we have larger reductions in all the other areas. The last time I calculated, I think the total US reduction was 15% or 15.1.
Okay. But again, my original question still stands. If the catch came in at 78%, that's still not actually a meaningful reduction.
You're saying the catch came in at 78%? Is that?
That was your harvest level, right? Was 78% of your TAC this year? That's what you actually landed?
But I think it was a little bit higher, but I think the question is if we didn't fully utilize the cap or our allocation, is this enough? That's the question you're asking. Is this enough of a cut in the Alaska areas?
I would respond. I mean, speaking for myself, anyone else here at the table on US or the Canadian side is welcome to speak up to this too. I think that, speaking as a fisherman, there's a lot of factors that could affect how many fish I catch and maybe not reaching the TAC of weather, size of fish. There's a lot of unpredictable parts of, mechanisms that go into fishing. So I think that you're going to see changes in that year over year. I guess that's my response to that.
Chris, did you have your hand up or?
Thanks. So I just want to make sure I understand this before commenting on it. So it says adopted to based on various criteria. What are the various criteria? And could you explain that 2B takes a reduction proportional to total US reduction? Explain those two things to me. So what's the various criteria? And what does that second part mean? 2B takes a reduction proportional to the total US reduction. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. I don't think I mentioned that 2B take a cut proportional. I don't think that I included that in my rationale, so you may have misquoted me there. Oh, it's on the screen there? I think that's relatively close. It's 2% off, and I think that the rationale there was that I currently still believe that allocation should be based somewhat on what we're seeing, the fish distributions in those areas. And I think that some areas have strayed from those numbers. What's one?
Okay, so it sounds to me, I'm still not clear on the various criteria, but based on your comment, it sounds to me like you're basically saying the TCY should be distributed based on 032 biomass distribution, or what we used to call apportionment. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question. Yes, roughly.
I think what I heard was 3-year average of the FIS distribution.
Yes, yeah. Linda has characterized that well.
A 3-year average, though, still of 032 biomass distribution, which is apportionment. So just a couple of comments on that. As everyone knows, Canada, since it was introduced in 2007, Canada's never supported it.
Are we on questions? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think we're still taking questions, and then we're supposed to get to comments on the motion.
Yeah, are there any further questions? That you had a question right then.
Yeah. First of all, I'd just like to state, Brian, I'm really happy to see how seriously you're taking, all of the U.S. is taking the kind of situation we're in here. I'm very happy to see some kind of difficult decisions being made on that side of the table. I know how much this is going to affect me, and the kind of cuts we've been taking over the last couple of years here in Canada have more than a directly proportional effect on my revenue streams. But I am going to raise concerns about kind of this cutting of paper fish. Like I said, there are different reasons why maybe you didn't reach your TACs, but there was some drastic gaps between what you could have caught and what you guys did catch in some of those regions there. And I wonder if you could just speak to your rationale. I know, I see that, 3A taking this 20% cut, it's a very substantial loss for them if they were catching all their fish and things. But yeah, like I said, like just there was some crazy disparities in what you could have caught. And if you could speak to why you believe they didn't catch it, if there was some, disasters out west. I know the fish price was shaky, but just hearing some of the testimony about the fishing out there it sounds like it couldn't be caught for a lot of the guys out there.
And thank you for the question. I can't speak to regions out west probably as well as someone out there could, and I hope that maybe someone will in comment once we get there. But speaking to regions like 2C and 3A, I think that one of the important considerations is that they're subject to catch share plans, and there's two sectors there that are fishing. And at least in 2C, I think that the charter forest may correct me, but I think that the charter sector they caught over 95% of their TAC. In 3A, I think we were 85%. And I've heard that there may be some concerns about model performance there, that it may be just because we had a little bit harsher regs. Yeah, and I guess that's my response, but thank you for the question.
Okay, we're finished with questions. Let's move to comments on the motion. We can start with Chris. I think we kind of cut you off. So if you want to comment on the motion.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, as I was mentioning, Canada's never accepted apportionment as a measure to distribute the TCY. As we heard from the IPHC yesterday, there's no biological basis for regulatory areas. And we've also heard from the staff and the secretariat in the past in a paper, unfortunately I can't remember the exact one, it's years ago, they mentioned that biomass distribution is a science exercise, but TCY distribution is a policy exercise that is informed by science and considers other factors takes other factors into account like socioeconomic consideration. We have seen from a science perspective that using simulation tested management procedure that Area 2B could take up to 20% of the coastwide TC, would not create a coastwide conservation issue. And I'd also make the point that over the past few years, US and Canada have deviated and agreed to deviate from 032 biomass distribution. They've done it between the two parties, and the US has done it within its own areas within Alaska and moved fish around. So, we won't be supporting this. I think that what we're seeing in 2B and at Region 2, I'm not sure that this reflects what's actually going on the grounds. We've got problems in Region 2, but I think there's bigger problems in other areas of the coast. Thanks.
Okay, Brian, and then we'll go over Canada.
I think this is an attempt to move towards, distribution by area. It doesn't get all the way there, but that's the attempt. And sometimes when I hear things like, this is a policy decision and socioeconomics need to come into play, it can come off as, your socioeconomics being more important than ours. And I know, I have a lot of fish in 3B, and that's how I feel a lot about 3B. I mean, I feel like, a lot of my fish is to use the term paper fish is being caught in other areas. And, my socioeconomics I feel like mine are pretty valid. I think everyone feels like their socioeconomics are pretty valid. And I would like to see all of the tax in each area go towards distribution. And I don't know, how we get there, but I would like us to have conversations about that because it makes sense to me. Everyone invests in this fishery and they all feel like, their payments are important, and they are, but I would like us to see us go in that direction. And as far as, I have a lot of fish out west as well. I think someone made a comment like, you're going to cut 15% from 4B, and what is that actually going to do? Me personally, I catch 100% of my quota, and this is going to mean I'm allowed to catch about 15% less. So
Thanks, Brian. Why don't we go to Ken?
I just want to make a comment that the commission staff has said, and it's generally accepted in this room, that the stock has moved to Region 2. The increase in the stock, which is a direct contradiction to apportionment and how it was done. So there's a reason why we have never accepted apportionment. So when you get the stock distribution, one day maybe that stock does shift back into Area 4 or some of those places. So, you know, like, you got to be realistic about what's going on here. And when when an overall quota is only taken to the extent that it has been in some areas, certainly some people are going to catch all their fish and other people are going to struggle. Some of it relates to how much fish they actually are trying to take in that area and how much they have to expend. And it's no different when you get to 2C and I can take my quota in 10 days and now it takes me 3 days to take it. There's less fish. There's a reason there's less fish. There's less fish in our area, but the stock has distributed itself into Region 2, which has happened for a number of reasons.
Mark?
Yeah, thank you. A couple of comments here. So we will be supporting this motion, although, you know, I wanted to point out that this actually represents a compromise on the U.S. side, and that there was a lot of U.S. stakeholder groups who felt like a larger coastwide cut was in order, given the dire situation that we're seeing on the water. But, you know, there's a lot of considerations that had to go into coming out with this 15% number. And I will say that, you know, one of those large considerations was how to balance this, you know, negotiated position that we're in with Canada at this very moment. And, you know, it's easy to say you don't agree with apportionment, but, you know, I think both contracting parties at this point are agreeing to a coast-wide stock assessment and a coast-wide distribution of the TCUI, which we have to do. And so at that point, you know, the numbers have to be divvied up somehow, and apportionment, really, whatever you want to call it, it's not an optional thing. And, you know, I will say that, first of all, you know, given the knowledge that, you know, Canada is, you know, trying to maintain their share at a certain point, it makes it so we cannot take a larger cut than Canada, because we will forever be taken advantage of if we do that, right? So if the US agreed to take a, you know, 20 or 25% cut, which is a number that was tossed around in our discussions, and Canada takes a smaller cut, then we will be penalized for the rest of our days for doing so. And so I'd like to just point out that in the interest of conservation, you know, this kind of trying to hold on to your share is very counterproductive. You know, and I'd also just like to point out that, you know, no matter how you slice and dice the numbers, you know, historically, the stock that has been in Canada, you know, historically has been between about 4.2% to 12.1% of the stock has been in Canadian water. So 12.1% was the all-time high, and we're close to it now. But you're still asking for, you know, 18% of the harvest. And I will say that in our region, Region 3A, you know, this is starting to have really substantial socioeconomic impacts on our stakeholders. You know, a lot of members of our group are not going to be able to make their payments, some of which will be foreclosing on their vessels, you know, and part of that is because fish are being shifted down to Region 2B, you know, and we're taking the largest cut out of all the areas, which is, you know, at a 20% TCY cut, that's going to work out to about a 22% cut in our quotas, you know, and people are going to suffer. And we're still going to do it because we believe it's the right thing for the resource. But I would just like to point out to our friends across the aisle here that, we would really appreciate it if there was some kind of, sign of goodwill. And so that's why we're proposing a 17% cut for 2B, just to show that, for more than 10 years, 2B has taken a larger harvest than really is indicated by any kind of metric of stock distribution, no matter how you look at it. And that's really all I got for now. Thank you.
Somebody else here, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just like to comment that the core of the stock is in Area 2 right now, and the people in this room are the stewards of this resource. And I don't see a meaningful cut within the American side of Region 2. That's where the fish are. That's where they are to be protected. And the numbers I see right now, it sort of appears like we're taking the brunt of the holding back on harvesting this resource for in the short term. Looks like we're propping up the area on either side as far as taking cuts. I'd like to see us in this room protect the fish that we got and not try to take cuts where there's no fish to cut. You're not saving any fish in this scenario.
Okay, I had Rebecca next.
Thanks. So my comments are just more generally to the numbers, I guess. These aren't in a particular order, but some of the concerns I have are with the FIS, so our actual survey results with our loss of stations. I think the FIS results have become less certain, and particularly in area 3A and 3B, those are really big areas, and the surveys tend to be concentrated in a very small area within the center of those combined areas. My sense is that everyone has concerns with the FIS and the lack of stations. What I've heard from Ian and Alan and looking at the data, we are at just low levels of abundance and low productivity. I'm not viewing that the halibut stock is in crisis. I have not heard that from Ian and Alan, but they have consistently said over the last few years and continue to say that we are at low levels. This year, I was particularly compelled by the comments around the 8-year-olds that right now are too young and too small to be caught in the fishery. And they do have some growing to do. So each year, I think they're in their rapid growing period. Each year we leave those in the water, there's going to be more fish that we'll have access to. So it does make sense to me to have cuts this year to let those younger fish grow up and enter the fishery. I will note that I'm concerned what's going to happen when the 2016 year class is caught, because I haven't heard of another year class coming up behind it. And I personally anticipate that this period of low halibut we're in is going to last for decades. If we don't see another year class coming up, they take at least 8 to 12 years to even be big enough to catch. I do think that the state we're in right now, it is low, and we need to figure out how to deal with that for the next, I would think, at least 10 to 20 years. I also have paid attention to what Ian and Alan have said about the halibut. They have not said there's a conservation concern or that it's in crisis. I think if it was, I trust that they would have indicated that. However, there's a lot of uncertainty with the FIS. There's uncertainty with how the models are put together, the assumptions that are in there. You can see those in the wide confidence intervals. Even on the harvest decision table, the range and fishing intensity, it's in tiny, tiny font at the top of the table. Those ranges can be between an F25 and like an F65. That's a huge range of uncertainty with really different impacts on the stock. So I do think it's appropriate to build in kind of a conservation buffer due to that uncertainty. And generally, I prefer more iterative, smaller cuts over a number of years rather than a very, very steep cut. So I was not in the 25% cut range because there is so much uncertainty as far as the halibut, but I think we have a lot more uncertainty about what's going to happen to our businesses that rely on the halibut. And then I very much I look forward to the day when we actually have a longer term harvest strategy or a management strategy. I feel like every year when I come to these meetings, we are having the same conversations. I feel like we're recreating the wheel every year, and we don't seem to have a midterm. I'll define that as 5 years, kind of a midterm plan or idea of how we want to manage the halibut. And so it feels like every year we're coming in and making these very one-off decisions. And I don't think that that's the best way to manage this, particularly long-lived stock. And that's all I had. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. I've got someone down the end of the table and then we'll go to Ben.
Good morning. My name is Larry Phillips and I cover fisheries policy for the American Sport Fishing Association. Appreciate an opportunity here to provide a few thoughts as a member of the conference board representing 2A. We recognize the significant challenges and sacrifices that both Alaska and Canada have made to ensure the long-term sustainability of the shared halibut resources in recent years. The 2A fishery is among the most intensively monitored on the West Coast. State, federal, and tribal managers have invested substantial resources to keep harvest within preseason allocations. In many cases, catch is monitored in real time and fishing opportunities are adjusted with little or no notice to meet conservation objectives. We also understand the interest in sharing the conservation responsibilities. However, as we heard yesterday, reducing the 2A allocation in 2025 will have no impact on the overall conservation of Pacific halibut. We're pleased that the 2A is being included in the FIS 2025 survey, which will provide us with critical data biomass to help determine if conservation measures are needed. And if the results indicate conservation concerns, we'll be the first to the table. So we respectfully urge maintaining the 2A TCEY at 1.65 million pounds. A reduction below this level will be symbolic, with little, while imposing significant economic and social hardships on coastal communities and federally recognized treaty tribes. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share these thoughts.
Thanks, Larry. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a few comments on the Region 2. I've only been coming to these meetings for 3 years, so I can't say I have a large personal history here, but Canada's been pushing since I've been here for bigger cuts than we've been taking for the last 3 years. And now I'm very, like I said, happy to see that the other side of the table is taking things quite seriously this year. Last couple of cuts we've taken 10%, just under 5%, and now these cuts are very significant. And for all the years I've been coming here, 2A has been talking about how stable their resource is without giving any credit to 2B's taking significant cuts. It's a highly migratory species, and their stability is a direct result of our sacrifice, in my mind. As far as 2B is concerned, in the last 3 years, I feel like we're the only ones taking meaningful cuts here. 1% for the last 2 years in 2C, recognizing that 8.5% is a big cut for you guys. Feels like you guys are just catching up to us, really, in how seriously you're taking the stock management. Like I said, I was pushing for more than 10 2 years ago and more than 5 last year. So I'm happy to take a large cut, don't get me wrong, but it does feel like we're shouldering the burden in 2C a bit for me.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I think what you guys are missing on the other side there is that by compartmentalizing countries and pegging your TCY to coastwide instead of regional, that you're affecting the adjacent areas. And so if you're picking on an 8.5% cut that doesn't represent a 15% cut, you're essentially saying that you're not appreciating the effect that your fishing level has on 2C, which I represent. So I think the MSE bears that out. I think you can go in and work on the tools and find out that there is an effect, a noticeable effect on 2C's survey from pegging your TCY to coastwide. And furthermore, just to come back in the conversation quite a ways, you cannot say that the US has condoned 18.3% harvest level of coastwide for Canada and then say that it's just been allowed. We've been in negotiations for a long, long time. There's never been full agreement. It's, well, let's kick this another year and see if we can come to some compromise. So please don't get it in your mind that you can just bank on that now, because that's just not the sentiment of the US.
Thanks, Forrest. Let's see, we have, I think Phil wanted to speak, and then we'll go down here.
Yeah, hello, I'm Phil Weidman. I'm a Sitka longliner. I've been fishing in 2C for 45 years now, and I've been on the conference board for 20 years. And I'm here to basically defend 2C. I used to sit back and watch Canada take way more production out of the area. And now if you look at it, since this deal in 2018 with us signing on to by one of our commissioners, there's been a noticeable difference in change of the resource between 2B and 2C. When this thing first started, Canada was at 30 million pounds of resource, harvestable resource, and we were at 26 million. And since the 6-year deal has gone on, we've gone down 8% in our resource, and Canada's gone down 30%. So they've gone from 30 million down to 20 million pounds. And so in using this program that they put in place, their harvest rates like last year were 31%, where we were at 22, the stated rate 22.5%. This agreement right here that you see in front of us is basically Canada is still over harvesting. They're going to be at a 27% rate based on their 13.6% of the resource. So they're not under 20 million pounds. And we're at 24. We used to be flopped. So we're fast moving from the 60-40 ratio. We've passed that. We have a larger resource because we've been following all the rules set aside, where you guys have been harvesting at a 30% rate and has been driving your stock down 10 million pounds, 33% in the last 6 years. So to say that we aren't being good neighbors, I think it should be reversed. And I'm just telling you that you're not being good neighbors, and taking harvesting at 27% this year is not helping your resource. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Sean, next.
Just a quick comment. It seems like there's a lot of focus on the percent change, the decrease. But when you look at the stock distribution, not only is 3A taking the largest decline here, but it makes up 22% of the stock. So 3A is shouldering a pretty good burden here in the decrease. I don't think we should just focus on the percent change. It should also consider the stock distribution too, and how that affects it.
Chris, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, won't be supporting the motion. Just in response to some of the comments, just remind everybody that there's no biological basis for the regulatory areas. So to say that something's happening in a regulatory area, or that there's a biomass, and that's not what the science says, we can't cherry pick the science. And the other point I'd make is I realize this is a difficult discussion. We're all here making some very difficult decisions that are going to affect us and the stakeholders we represent. I don't want to belittle that, but I've heard comments like, well, Canada's prioritizing its socioeconomic considerations over others. It's two sides of the same coin. Asking us to move away from our historic share is prioritizing your socioeconomic considerations over us. It's a difficult discussion, but that's the reality. And if you look at the metrics in 2B, our fizz was down 1%, our commercial catch rate's down 1%, but those are still things of concern to us in that there are problems in Region 2, and we need to address those, and Canada will be proposing a cut when it comes to our time to speak. But there are bigger problems in the other areas of the coast, and we need to figure out a way to get ahead of this, because what we've been doing so far is not changing the direction and the trend of the stock. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, we have a couple more comments and then maybe we'll try and vote. I've got Jeff and then Brian over here.
Sorry, I was just wanting to scroll up just so that I could see what the resulting percentages of the spawning biomass in each area was with the new.
A little more. That's good? Okay.
Yeah, well.
Okay, then let's go. You got it? Okay, let's go to, what did I just say? We had Jeff Kaufman and then Brian, right? Maybe Phil or somebody's got a mic on there. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, those of us from 4CD and E, from the Pribilofs anyway, we support the conference board motion as it is written. And I thought I would speak today a little bit to provide some rationale for the minutes, and also maybe speak to a little bit about why out in the western area we left quite a significant amount of quota in 2024 in the water. So the FIS in 4CD&E was down by 3% this year. Then the area 4CD&E was actually surveyed in 2024 as well. So our FIS was down by 3%. Our fisheries CPUE was down 1% in 4C and up by 6% in 4D. However, we did notice that some local catches were down by as much as 20% around the islands. Despite the fact that our FIS is only down by 3% and our fishery CPUEs are fairly flat, we are requesting a 15% reduction to our TCEY, which then translates into a 20.1% reduction in our FCEY. So it's quite significant, especially when compared to the FIS and compared to the catch rates in our particular area. Some of the issues that we were facing out there that led to fish being left in the water is the low ex-vessel price for almost all of the season until about mid-September. We were receiving $4 a pound, which is quite a spread between where we fish and in the Gulf areas where the price was $6 or so, and obviously much higher. In addition, out west, the expenses continue to increase. A plane ticket to round trip to Dutch Harbor is about $2,000 right now. The food out there is incredibly expensive, as is the bait, which is about $1 a pound. So the higher expenses then led to tighter margins, and it's for economic reasons, I think, that we're seeing fewer boats participating in the Bering Sea fisheries. Right now, it just gets tough when fish price is low and expenses increase so drastically. It gets very difficult for the fleet, and so some of them are opting not to participate. And I think another reason too that some fish was left in the water in 4CD&E last year is I'm sorry, I lost that thought. That'll come back to me. So I'll keep moving. So we got the tighter margins, and this year, there was a lack of processing. We were down to 2 processors. That's probably part of the reason for the price. We have a new buyer coming online out west right now, and hopefully Silver Bay will come in next year. And so we're a little bit more optimistic about the processing capabilities. As you know, if you fish in 4C and 4D, the nearest delivery port is Dutch Harbor, and it's about 240 miles each direction to St. Paul, but it's closer to 400 miles around or 400 miles from Dutch to St. Matthew and back. And so it's extremely long runs. And I was surprised to hear yesterday when I think it was Ian was talking about sand fleas in across the range or the coastwide stock. And one of the things that we noticed in the Bering Sea this year was that the water was extremely cold. it was 40 degrees or less for most of the season. And by the end, it reached 42 degrees on the surface. Typically in our area, you'll see that the fish start to show up around 47 degrees. And by the time we're done fishing, it's typically 52 degrees. So it was at least 10 degrees colder, and the fish just didn't shallow up as they had in the past. The other thought that I lost a few minutes ago is that as the FCEYs continue to decline, more and more people are opting not to go to the Bering Sea. It may not be worth bringing a boat out because our quotas are less than half of what they used to be traditionally. And so as the quotas get reduced further and further, it makes it more difficult for boats to participate in that fishery. So I think that covers most of the points that I wanted to make. For the record, also justifies a little bit about why we're asking for a much larger cut than the reduction in fish that we experienced in 2024. And again, our area was surveyed, so there's a fresh survey there. So having said all that, I support the conference board motion, and I support a 15% reduction to our TCY, which again translates into a 20% reduction in our FCEY. And we do that out of concern for the stock, not just in our area, but coastwide. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, I'm going to go to, I think Brian had his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Brian Funt from Petersburg. We will be supporting this motion. It's our feeling that we are in crisis or approaching crisis. In the last day, we have heard that productivity continues to be low. Agent size still a concern, and that we are possibly at all-time spawning biomass lows. So we think there is a reason for concern. I would like to talk about 3A taking a 20% cut. That's been the breadbasket of this fishery for a long, long time, and it has allowed possibly some, I can't think of a better word to use, discrepancies in how everybody else contributes to the spawning biomass. But things aren't good out there anymore. And as you go west, even worse, it sounds like. And so now we are asking, or we are relying on Area 2 to provide a larger percentage of the whole. And we need both of those areas to contribute. And we can't punish 2C for being conservative over the past 10 years and having a healthy fishery. So I guess in closing, the point I want to leave us with is our ability to make social economic choices it's starting to really hurt us. So that's why we're asking the Canadians to contribute more. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, let's go over here to, oh, sorry, we got someone way down there that hasn't a chance. Then we'll come back to you.
Russell Cameron, UFAW Unifor. I just want to speak to what we call apportionment and whatever here. All through our history, we've taken a fair share in Area 2B, and yet we have a good stock. It's down, but it's not down as the rest of the coast looks just as well. So we're I don't feel that we're harvesting it too hard, and that's been a result of a lot of years of history, and so I don't feel that. I feel that the result our 18% or whatever is down from historical, but I can't see going down to whatever. So I'm happy to see serious cuts being proposed. But I just gotta speak to, I think the fairness of what's been happening over years. Since we went to away from closed area assessments, we've been in this battle where we sometimes lose sight of the whole stock because we spend too much time fighting over this. Anyway, I'm not changing anybody's minds. I just wanted to put it on the table.
Thanks, Russell. Let's see. Okay, let's try and wrap up pretty quick. You got 5 more. Okay, let's start down at the end of the table and then we'll go to Malcolm.
Leighton Lockett, ADAC Community Development Corporation. We will be supporting the motion. There's been a lot of discussion, I will say, on the U.S. side, and I think that's been very well iterated through comments thus far in the body. But specifically, I do want to talk to 4B, because obviously we are in part of 4B. We own 15% of the quota in that area. We came into this meeting, seeing that there was a potential increase in our area, and while that was encouraging, we echo that there is a significant amount of uncertainty, and that's primarily related to the lack of survey sampling in 2024 and a partial survey in 2022. Specifically, with the lack of commercial harvests in the region, and I can go into more detail, but I'll try to be very brief on that. The resulting issue is that we lack data in 4B and feel that there's a significant source of data that is continuously missing regarding 4B. We need surveys to be completed, and we need a sufficient sampling size to be statistically relevant. There's a lot of conjecture, regarding further west, yet many of those harvesters are not in this room this year. We have talked in the room that area stock health, about area stock health, yet in 4B, we're denied that ability to know what's actually in the area, to know what the sense of our stock is. If we maintain that it is one biomass, and of course we've shared our opinions on that before, then the lack of data in 4B, 4A in general means that there's less fish in that biomass. And so we're fighting over a smaller piece of the pie versus do we really know what's happening? And if we say, again, the talking apportionment and 4B stock is higher, maybe it means a bigger cut in 4B, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it means the pie becomes bigger because we get more data. But we are significantly lacking that. And, unfortunately, listening to staff this morning and saying how much financial pressure there is, I think that conversation needs to shift to how do we get IPHC more resources to do the job that it needs to have the data effectively, whether it's in, catch sampling or survey, sets. Without that, we are going to, as Rebecca said, we're going to keep reinventing the wheel every year. And without that harvest policy and other data, we're just making bad decisions after bad year over year. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Angel, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I'll just briefly add to Leighton's comments. We'll also be supporting the motion and share concerns with many others about the low level of spawning stock biomass and the performance of many fisheries across regulatory areas this past year. 4B has the smallest TCY of any other region coastwide, and it, like Leighton said, is probably the most data poor region. While the FIS was up 4%, 4B hasn't had a comprehensive survey since 2019, and the fishery data is very limited. The number of vessels operating and the amount of landings has dropped considerably in recent years, with less than 20 landings in 2024. So it's incredibly challenging to recommend informed catch limits considering the non-existence of a survey and the very limited fishing activity, all of which is leading to a very high degree of uncertainty in our region and the Aleutians. No secret that the harvest utilization was very low, 30%, while certainly there are biological concerns. Here, there are also numerous economic challenges. As Jeff mentioned, we have many of the similar issues in the Aleutian Islands. The Aleutians are incredibly remote, and we don't have an operating processor in the region and haven't for numerous years. This is added to considerable increases in run times for individual vessels, particularly if there's weather, with the closest market 3 days away. So I think there's a very little tolerance for boats to explore and look for new areas and grind away if they're not finding fish. and to come back after they've completed other fisheries. So these compounding factors have all led to very decreased harvest capacity and significant underutilization of quotas in 4B. So while we support all the reductions identified in this motion, considering the heavy socioeconomic factors and the elutions, we would support 15% reduction there. We think this is consistent with the MSAB guidance and consideration of interannual stability. And I think the stepwise approach will give us a little bit of time if the survey is actually conducted as planned in 2025 to reassess the situation at that time. So thank you.
Thanks, Angel. Okay, let's see if we can, we've got Malcolm and Forrest, Garrett, add you to the list.
Okay, I'll try to be brief. So I don't support the motion because I don't think the cuts are deep enough. I've expressed that same sentiment last year and didn't support the motion. But I will say, just in terms of there being a degree of cuts in here, that the as far as the percentage of quota harvested in 2C, 98.4% of the quota was harvested last year, 3A 92%, 3B 89%, and those are the areas where a significant amount of the proposed cuts are taking place. So I do think we will have meaningful reductions. In my opinion, they aren't going far enough. I understand it was a compromised position. And I can just leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Forrest and then Garrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Southeast Alaska Guides Organization, Forrest Braden. We will not be supporting this motion. We feel like, well, frankly, just a different perspective than most folks in this room have. And that simply stated that we need to arrest the stock declines, but the real savior of this process is going to be incoming recruitment. And we can put a lot of pressure trying to affect the stock trajectory, but really the recruitment's going to be the key there. And so we just thought that 10% would be adequate, an adequate cut. Cuts are accumulative. We took a 5% last year, roughly, and a 10% this year. We felt like that would have been sufficient to take a look at what it did to the stock, considering the socioeconomic and economic consequences with not a lot of return short term if you're making these cuts. But we do respect other folks' opinions. I think there's a lot that we don't know. And so then there's speculation on both sides of it, which you've heard kind of a spectrum here, and we'll leave it at that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Forrest. Okay, Garrett, I don't think you've spoken yet, and then maybe we can wrap up there.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. Garrett with the NGFA. Couple comments on behalf of the stakeholders in 3B, or representing owner operators and deckhands who have purchased their quota in Region 3, primarily 3B. We had some concerns with the low survey coverage in the area. It happened to coincide with the timing of the FIS in 3B. There had already been a lot of effort right across the line by the directed fleet when the survey came through. Our experiences were closer to a 10% decline. So, 15% is a compromised position for sure. We just would like to remind everybody that, there's been a lot of comments about, protecting the smaller fish, allowing them to grow up and contribute to the spawning biomass. But that knife cuts both ways when we have, fishing intensities in 2B and 2A that are, at historic levels, relative to the norm being well over, 1.5. If we were using, 1 as kind of a harvest policy, historical harvest policy. So, to say that we're saving fish is just really not true, because we're just shifting fish and fishing intensity to to other areas. Just would like to have in the record that we have the second highest weight per unit of effort in the area. We have the lowest fishing intensity by far, and we're fully utilizing the resource in that area. So we are concerned about the trends in the stock and are willing to contribute, but would like to see a return to 032 stock distribution as a basis for area allocations. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, everybody. We've tried to capture as much of that as we could. Been scribbling. So I think we're ready for a vote on this one. Motion is before you on the screen. Catch limits across all areas, clickers in hand, and we'll go ahead and open the vote now and ask people to record your vote. So we've got PSA online, but not voting. If you are having trouble voting and want to vote, you can put it in the chat. You can call it out. And also we have one Canada vote missing. AGT.
Krista, where did Daniel go? Where did Daniel go? Oh, right.
Okay, so we have two people out of the room. Okay. As long as it's not that they're.
It's online.
Okay, it just voted. Did PSA vote? And they didn't communicate. Okay. You got it in the chat. Okay, we got everybody. All right, closing the vote. We'll take just a minute to finish tallying.
Madam Chair, if in subsequent votes, if we could just have, 30 seconds to look at the screen, final tally before it disappears, just to see where people are at, if that's okay?
We can show that if nobody objects. Okay, so this failed for Canada, passed for the US. So I would expect Canada would want to make a motion for, okay. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. Like to make the motion, move that the 2025 TCUI for IPHC regulatory area 2B be set at 5.5 million pounds. That's dressed head off weight, which is a 15% reduction from 2024 levels. If somebody wants to second that, I'll speak to the motion.
Angus Steveston Halibut Association.
You want to speak to that a bit, Chris?
Yes, I will. First comment I'd make is that the 5.5 might be a rounding error, maybe like 5.499500. The intent is the 15% reduction. Okay, just want to make sure that's clear. And just as we've heard in the past and reinforced today, Pacific halibut are a single coastwide population. And as we all know and we've seen and we've talked about today, and we've been looking at the stock assessment signaling a number of concerns. Some examples are, and despite the reductions to the coastwide TCY over the last 2 years, the FIS and the fishery indices are at historic low levels. The stock remains at a low productivity level due to low weighted age and low recruitment through at least 2016. And the strength of the 2016 year class is really still much in question, and whether it will even be average. So we can't really count on that. And for the first time, the probability of being below the limit reference point, B20, has risen above 1% and now sits at the end of 2024, sits at 11%. And there's a lack of or reduced FIS sampling in many areas of the coast, and that's resulted in uncertainty in both the trend and scale of the stock distribution in different IPHC biological regions, and then in regulatory areas. And also just the size, as was pointed out, the size of the credible intervals of the FIS results this year are much bigger than they've been. There's more uncertainty there. So as I said, the stock assessment is signaling a problem with the stock. In IPHC regulatory area 2B, the fishery and the FIS 032 WPOE trends both declined by 1% compared to last year, but they're at or near historic lows. And the reports from the commercial fishing from the fleet was that the fishing people had to work to catch their fish. It's described people saying it was scratchy out there. So given the metrics in our area this year, we feel a 50% cut in our area. Some may seem it was more than what's needed, but we need to be careful. In biological region 2, there is a problem, but as I said earlier, there are bigger problems in other areas of the coast. We need reductions that will make a difference, that will be meaningful. We need to get ahead of these stock declines and hopefully help things turn around. IPHC regulatory areas 2A and 2C need to be part of this to help address the problems in biological region 2. And all regulatory areas need to make meaningful cuts to address the problems in their regions and help the coastwide population. Thank you. And I can provide this and email it to you so you don't have to try.
That'd be great. Okay, thanks, Chris. Okay. Oh, send it to CB support. That's the right email. Okay, anyone want to respond to that? Any other comments? I mean, we can probably carry forward the discussion, but go ahead, Rebecca. Rebecca and then Mark.
Yeah, I just had a question, Chris. When you refer to things turning around, what kind of a timeline are you kind of thinking of or anticipating for that turnaround?
That's an excellent question. You're opening up a discussion that I've bothered a lot of you with recently, but I think that's an excellent question for the MSAT process and the MSE, and we're going to talk about that a little later. But I think that's really what's missing in a lot of our discussion is we don't have a plan. We don't have here's where we want to be and how we're going to get there over what timeline and what are the trade-offs to get there. You know, if we do it over a shorter timeline, it's more costly to, there might be bigger reductions needed, or we could spread it over a longer time. But those are the type of things we can answer through the MSE process.
Yeah, and I agree with that. From your own perspective, are you thinking that that's at least 10 years? I mean, do you personally foresee that we could turn it around within 3 to 5 years? And I understand this is like an MSAB, MSC question. Thanks.
I think those are good questions, and the only thing I take in that is I was listening to Dr. Stewart, and he might correct me that I'm misquoting him, but he made the point that even if we had recruitment all of a sudden appear today, that's going to be 10 years around there. So we have to realize we've got a period here where. Until we see some recruitment, where we could easily, 10 years is, we might not see any movement till then. And that's why, again, I think that, and we'll talk about this later when we talk about MSE, but I think that's where it's going to be necessary and helpful to figure out how to kind of move things forward and understand what the implications are.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I'd like to thank the Canadian side for, coming up with a large reduction. And I think we're all on the same page here that the resource is in danger and that we do want to take a cautious and conservationist approach. However, I will not be able to support this motion, and primarily because we've spoken about the historical harvest in Canada, and I would like to point out that the historical harvest in Canada was accomplished by Canada refusing to take cuts when the United States took cuts, and Canada used the non-agreement process to maintain an elevated catch, and the United States had to unilaterally take cuts through our government agency. And so we have never consented to this kind of historical harvest, and it's unprecedented since perhaps the days when Canada was still harvesting in U.S. waters before we closed the EEZ. And I'd like to point out, we've spoken a lot about fairness between areas 2B and 2C, and I would like to point out that even at this proposed reduction, area 2B will be harvesting a larger share than a larger total catch than area 2C. And historically, there has never been more fish. There's always been more fish in area 2C than in area 2B. When you look at the 3-year average modeled stock distribution for area 2C, it's at 12.7%. And even if you look at the entire time series back to 1993, that's at 9.2%. Area 2B, the 3-year average is 11.5%. And going back over the full time series, it's at 8.4%. So no matter how you look at it, there's always been a greater proportion of the stock in area 2C. And yet they are harvesting fewer halibut up there now than is being harvested in Canadian waters. And I'd also like to point out for the record that Canada is contributing approximately 16.8% of the funding of the IPHC, which is contributing a large part to our shortfall and our struggles of maintaining an adequate FIS. And given the level of concern for the stock that we are in right now, we really need to fund the FIS to the best of our abilities. And so I would call on the Canadian side to up their share of financial contributions, particularly given the high harvest. And I'd also just like to point out to finish here that the U.S. would like to decide how to distribute the catches in U.S. areas, and that this continuous pegging of Canada's TCI to the coastwide TCI really hamstrings us in this area. Like, if we go into a situation of really serious concern for the conservation of the stock, and the U.S. would like to take larger, more draconian cuts in certain areas, we're not going to be able to do that if we're continuously being pegged to the coastwide share. And so I'd say for the health of the resource, I would kindly request Canada to back off this pegging and also help us fund the FIS for the following years. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Ken, go ahead.
First of all, I have a huge amount of respect for the people in this room taking a long-term view as to rebuilding this stock and then the cuts that are necessary for us all to take. Stock distribution is a subjective term. You can't see them. It's not like a tree on the side of the mountain where you can actually see it. Fish have tails, they move. That's the reality. A tree has roots, it doesn't move. And the FIS, the design of the FIS, and those types of things are causing us a lot of trouble in actually getting proper assessments as to make the best available information. I mean, even in Canada, you've heard that the FIS could not survey 3 stations. And that's because of rockfish closed areas. There's one area in Canada that I don't know if they ever used the FIS there, but it's actually, the name of it is Halibut Rocks. I'm sure it was named that long before I was born. I used to fish there. A number of other people on this table used to fish there. I can't fish there anymore. If we had 100% of the area available for us to fish, you would see a difference in our productivity rate as far as fishing goes. That's just a given. We also have areas of our coast that we really can't access that's good habitat because we don't have individual fishermen at the time where they are or whatever, do not have the quota available for yellow eye rockfish to be able to even risk taking a chance of setting in there because they'll never get their halibut out of the water otherwise. So our productivity today is not as good as it was 20 years ago. Our productivity is not really dramatically decreased. There's less fish in our area. There's no doubt about it. And some of the things that are happening because of that is some of the same areas are just getting hit on a daily basis, which means the fish never get a chance to build up in there, similar to what we hear about around in 4CD. So there's a lot of things that are subjective. And we can fight forever as to how much is in a room. But the reality is this, is as fishermen, we all know, if the fish are there, you're going to catch them. And we know that they're not there. And when they're not there, economics comes into play also. I'm sure if you could go out and catch all your fish in one day, the run to Dutch Harbor would make an awful lot of difference as to having to fish 5 or 6 days and the amount of bait that you have to use, and on it goes. It's just the way it is. We understand that. It's not really an argument to use as to why the stock is depleting or why I didn't catch my fish. The reality is the stock is going down. When it comes to the numbers that science needs, it's our responsibility to supply them with the best information that we can give them as fishermen. I have a camera pointed at me 100% of the time. It has changed my behavior drastically in what I've done. The confidence of our numbers, I am 100% confident in them. I'm not 100% confident in any numbers without 100% monitoring because I know what happened. I don't think anybody is much different than I was. We hear about shortage of logbook submittings. I think there's some people that don't really know how that affects them. There's a number of things that need to be cleaned up so that we can get to supplying science with the best information, and then they can in turn give us better distribution on the stock and those types of things. Meanwhile, while we're getting to that point, and it seems like it's a really long road to get there, we have to continue to come back and work this out between us. Thank heavens, there's a real good agreement that we need to do something drastic.
Thanks, Ken. Chris?
Thank you. I just like to clarify a couple points. There seemed to be some confusion over, first of all, Canada, when we're talking about a share and the like, this is not going back to when we could fish in each other's waters. This is the recent past. So just so we're clear on that, and that for a few years there, we actually had an agreement between Canada and the US where it was a 4-year agreement. So, and the other point I'd like to make is that somehow is that in all these years, Canada and the US, the parties to agreement, have agreed on what the TCUIs are. So it's not something Canada's just done. This has been done. The US and Canada have reached an agreement. We didn't reach an agreement in 2018. And the other point I'd make is I just find it, on one hand, we're being, the proposal saying Canada, you should have a 14.7% share of the available harvest. But you need to fund more. Like why should we be funding more if we're only getting 14, bear more of the cost, but only get some of a small portion of the benefits. So I just like to point that out. And I think, and remind everybody, if you're not aware of it, Canada has put more money towards the FIS this year. And I think that has to be a priority for all of us, is trying to figure out how we're going to get more money to the FIS in the coming years. Without that, the stock assessment is, we get more and more uncertainty and possibly more and more bias. So thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Whoops, I got Maddie.
I just wanted to address a couple of those, especially the productivity and the distribution. For as long as I have been coming here, I think this is my 9th, Canada has maintained that there's no biological basis for regulatory areas and that fish have tails and swim. To that end, I would suggest that there's also no biological basis for a national share because fish have tails and swim. I also wanted to address a point made by our Canadian counterpoints that our proposal was premised on cutting paper fish, but Canada has also maintained that we're working with one coastwide stock. And if we are working with a singular coastwide stock, we cannot also be taking cuts out of the wrong areas. Those two things cannot be true at the same time, in my opinion. And the stocks may be shifting. We are seeing shifting stocks. However, the FIS clearly shows that Canada has 13.6% of the O32 biomass this year. And if Canada believes the FIS is inadequate, as I think we all do this year, I would like to reiterate that perhaps it's time for Canada to kick in more than 1/5 of the contracting party contributions, which is what they are at even with their additional contributions this year. And I understand that, maybe you have a smaller portion of the TAC and you're reaping a smaller portion of the benefits, but you hold 50% of the votes here, which seems like it would necessitate a larger contribution to the science.
Thanks, Maddie. Had one more here.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to that larger contribution to the science. I mean, 2B as well as 2C, have been financially supporting the FIS for years now. We've been allowing an exploitation of our resource year after year, hitting every single station in every single profitable area, which happens to be a good portion of 2B and 2C for that matter. So I wonder if you're taking into account, it's about 1% of the commercial catch that's caught, and it's not allocation obviously, but it is affecting the resource year after year, and I wonder if you're taking that into account in your financial calculations.
I would be taking that into account. I would also say that part of it is offset by the fact that Canada has been taking more fish than they biologically perhaps should be.
Yeah, Chris. Okay, Chris.
Yeah, just make the point that Canada didn't come up with the statement that there's no biological basis for the IPHC regulatory areas. That's something that Secretariat has determined and said. And second of all, if we're talking about the science has clearly shown that Canada could take up to a 20% share of the coastwide TACY, and it would not cause a conservation concern for the stock.
The science also clearly shows that we could not take any cuts and the stock would biologically probably be okay in the long term.
Okay, so we're covering ground we've covered. I guess I do want to remind people funding the FIS is important. There was a group, actually twice, of US stakeholders who went to DC last year. That's why we got 1.5 million extra to the IPHC for this year from the US side. That's important. Appreciate the extra contribution, the 300,000 from Canada. something we all need to work on because we all recognize it's a problem. The comments around the table. If we're ready to vote on this, I think we got good stuff for the record to reflect the views from both sides. Let's open the vote. Go ahead and record your vote. I didn't make sure everybody's clear what they're voting on, but I assume they were. We have quite a few. US FVOA hasn't voted. SPC hasn't. Oh, there we go. Okay. CBSFA, I don't see your vote yet. HASA. Let's get a vote.
Daryl.
Got PSA, great. ACDC, we're still looking for your vote.
Also looking for the
SHSM. Oh, AGT, yeah. And SHSMA.
Can you please note that AGT needs to refresh?
What?
AGT needs to refresh their browser.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, got it. Okay, SHSMA, are you in the room, out of the room? Looks like they're missing. Okay. Okay, I think we're ready to close the vote. Good. Okay, let's go ahead and close it.
On in the other screen.
Forrest, he's the one that asked for it, right? Okay, you can take it down. Okay, so we have the vote back. So passed for Canada, did not pass on the US side. You guys can all see that. All right, well, I think that's a good time to take a break. Let's break for lunch and plan to be back at 1:30. We still have regulatory proposals. They may take some time and some other issues to go through. But thanks, everybody.